Chapter 4. The summer went by smoothly for Sandra. She had stopped stealing because there was no reason for it now. She had all the money she needed, and her clothes were more than adequate for her needs. With an abundance of food, she had started to fill out, all except her breasts, which were going to be small anyway. She ate constantly, always nibbling on something, until Sammy had commented, "One day, Sandra, if you continue to eat like that, you're going to weigh over 300 pounds. She laughed and continued to eat. Eddie had stopped in the store one day for some wine and found her there alone. Sammy was in the back of the store. "Well, well, if it ain't young blood, what's happening, sweet thing? I know you ain't forgot me." "No, I ain't forgot you," she replied softly. "Good, good," he replied, then walked out of the store without paying her for the bottle of wine or cigarettes she had given him across the counter. Sandra didn't say anything. She walked over and got her purse and counted the money out for the wine and cigarettes. Sammy had watched the whole thing from the lookout slot in the back of the store. He watched as she counted out the change from her purse and put it in the register. He smiled softly, and impatiently he brushed back a tear that appeared in the corner of his eye. He loved honesty. It was a quality in a person that always won him over. He came out from the back of the store. "You know, Sandra, I've been thinking. You've worked for us quite a while now. Maybe it's time we gave you a little raise. Maybe $10 more a week, okay?" Sandra glanced up into his kind face. She was so glad that he hadn't seen what had just happened. She didn't know how she could have explained Eddie taking the stuff out without paying for it. Sammy was so kind that at times when she thought about how it would have been to have a father, she wished that he would have been like Sammy. While working in the store, she was never aware of a racial problem, until one of her mother's drunk friends came in and called Sammy a name. When she blushed in shame, Sammy looked at her and laughed it off. What they said didn't disturb him, he said, because a drunk rarely knew what he was saying anyway. But she was mad the rest of the day. Only when Eddie came in the store was Sammy different. He watched Eddie closely. Sometimes Eddie would pick her up after work. "What's with that honky?" Eddie would ask. "He acts like he's your father or something." "Don't call him no honky," she'd reply hotly. "I mean it, Eddie. He's got a name, and it sure ain't honky." Okay, baby. You still gonna loan me the $8? He inquired. He'd blown his loan one night by referring to Sammy as a peckerwood. Sandra had got hot and jumped out of the car. Now he knew that if he wanted his blow money, it was best not to talk about the old white dude. Sandra was a strange young girl. At times, she didn't act like a young girl. He knew she liked his company, but when he tried to get close to her, she froze up. He could kiss her, but that was as far as it went. He was beginning to believe she was really a virgin. "What you wantin' with the money, Eddie? I really want to know what you're doing with it. You don't drink that much wine, so it must be stuff, huh?" she asked sharply. Eddie glanced up quickly. At first he was furious with her for asking. Then he decided that he didn't give a damn anyway. He only got about $10 a week out of her, so he didn't have that much to lose. "Yeah, baby, I want to buy me a fix," he stated harshly, not caring one way or the other what she thought about it. On the other hand, Sandra didn't care either. She had wanted to save the $8 he'd asked for so that she could put it in the bank on Monday. She gave a sigh of relief. "Well, if that's all you want, I got a balloon at home I found. You can have that, and I'll save my $8. "Shit!" Eddie exclaimed loudly. "You probably ain't found nothing but some damn bunk. I want some dope, girl. I don't want no bullshit." "It ain't bunk, it's dope," she replied coldly. If it was junk, I'd have thrown it away long ago. How you know what it is? You don't use. Eddie continued the argument. Well, if you don't want it, it's up to you, she answered coldly. But I bet it's more in the balloon I'm gonna give you than in the one you was gonna buy. Eddie didn't answer. He just turned and started driving in the direction of her home. When they reached her apartment building, he asked, "Can I come up and fix there? I got my outfit with me." Sandra hesitated briefly. Well, I guess it would be all right if my mother ain't home. She wasn't worried about her mother catching Eddie fixing. She was worried about the hell she knew her mother would raise when she found Eddie in the apartment. Sandra had never taken a boy to their place, so she knew her mother would have something to say. Since it was payday, she didn't have to worry, though. A few dollars would smooth over her mother's hurt feelings. Eddie got out of the car and followed her into the old apartment building. The stairs they went up were run down and needed repair. He stood back as she stopped in front of the apartment and listened. Then she opened the door. The inside wasn't any different than any of the other crummy apartments he had been inside. "Have a seat," Sandra said after they entered, and she went on into a bedroom. In a second she was back, carrying a red balloon in her hand. Eddie's eyes got big as he saw the size of the balloon. "It must be at least a spoon," he said to himself as he stared at the object in her hand. She tossed it to him. He caught it and felt how full it was. With his teeth he bit it open and the dope fell out. Sandra gave him a piece of newspaper to hold under the bag. The stuff tasted bitter and dark. Then he slowly removed his outfit from his pocket. "You better take it in the bathroom in case my mother comes in," Sandra cautioned. Yeah, I know what you mean," he said, not really knowing, too concerned with the dope in his hand. Sandra followed him into the toilet. She stood back, leaning against the wall, and watched him shake out a small amount from the balloon into his cooker. He removed matches from his pocket and struck 3 of them and held them under his cooker. The dope inside the empty wine top dissolved quickly. He set the cooker down on top of the toilet seat and removed his belt. He twisted it around his arm, slowly squeezing his fist until he found a vein that suited his need. Sandra watched closely. It was the first time she had ever seen anyone really cook up some dope, though she had heard about it often enough. She watched, fascinated, as he drew up the drug into the needle, then stuck it into his arm. He got a hit quickly. Blood rushed back into the bulb, and he slowly removed the tie from around his arm, then shot the dope. Before he could take the needle out of his arm, his eyes closed and his head dropped down on his chest. Instantly, Sandra became frightened. "Eddie! Eddie! You got to wake up!" she yelled. When that didn't do any good, she reached over and pinched his arm until he lifted his head. His eyes rolled back in his head until she could only see the whites of them. "Oh my God," she moaned, then started to slap his face the way she did the drunks when she had to awaken them so that they could go home early in the morning. Slowly his eyes regained some sort of focus. She didn't stop working on his face until he opened his eyes and spoke. "God damn, that showing the hell ain't no bunk. Shit. It must be raw dope. That shit can be cut, baby. You don't know what you got there, do you?" He stared at her foolishly, trying to get his mind right. "Yeah, I know what I got now," Sandra said sharply, her eyes never leaving his face. The possibilities of what she had didn't escape her whatsoever. "You got some more of this?" he inquired, showing that he truly was himself again. "No, all I had was that balloon I gave you. You want to give me a little of that back?" Sandra asked quickly. "That wouldn't be right," Eddie replied. "You said I could have the balloon, and I didn't shoot it all because I was trying to save some." Now you want me to give that back to you." He didn't bother to add that if he had shot it all, he'd more than likely have been dead. Eddie knew the dope was raw, uncut dope. The bag he had would bring him close to $200, once he cut it and sold it himself. He decided his best bet was to get away from Sandra as fast as he could. That way, she wouldn't bother about asking for any of the stuff back. Sandra had to hold back a smile as she watched Eddie prepare to leave. He rolled up the rest of the dope, making sure the balloon was folded inside some newspaper so that whatever drug fell out would still be wrapped up inside the newspaper. He almost ran out of the apartment since he was in such a hurry to find out how much of a cut the dope would stand. Sandra knew from his actions she had something good. She took a hot bath and went to bed, waiting patiently for the next day when she'd be in school. She knew just how to get rid of the dope. She had thought about it for the past few months, but had never put her plan into action because she hadn't known just what she had. Now that she knew, she didn't waste any time. The next day in school, she searched the corridors until she found the boy she had been looking for. Chink was a young boy who looked so much like a monkey that the rest of the kids had started calling him Chink. She had started speaking to the bashful young boy months ago. Chink wasn't in any of her classes, but she knew him and knew about him. He was the school's pusher. He was a short, dark-complexioned boy with long, muscular arms. He was strong and was known to be a mean fighter, but when it came to girls, he was scared to death of them. He couldn't look one in the eye. He danced from one foot to the other whenever one talked to him, which was rare because the girls acted like they were afraid of him. When Sandra approached him in the hall, she had a hard time keeping him cornered while she talked to him. "I want to see you after school, man. You hear me, Chink? I want you to wait for me outside the front door." Chink heard her all right, but he couldn't stand still. He wasn't really frightened. He just didn't know how to act around girls. Since he lived with just his father behind the pool room his father ran, he never was near any women. He liked Sandra. She was one of the few girls, if not the only one in the whole school, who spoke to him every time she saw him, and it didn't seem to make any difference to her who she was with. If she was with other girls, even though it made Chink nervous when she was, she would still go out of her way to speak to him. Now she wanted him to wait for her outside of school. He knew that he'd do it, but he hated the idea of it. Standing out there where everyone could see him, waiting for a girl. "I'll be looking for you, man," she said, leaving him in the hall. He sighed with relief as she departed, but he was still wondering what she wanted. It couldn't be dope, he told himself, because he knew everybody who used in the school, and she didn't hang out with none of that crowd. His mind was in a turmoil the rest of the day, wondering what was the reason. It didn't bother his schoolwork, though, because he was another one of the practicing, illiterate children that filled the ghetto schools. Chink suffered from the same problems that Sandra had. When he was younger, he had a clothes problem, but his main problem was his face. He hated the ridicule so much that he tried to become invisible. He couldn't stand for a teacher to call on him in a classroom, so he pretended to be mentally disturbed. With his looks, it wasn't hard to fool the teachers. Most of the young white school teachers couldn't stand to look upon his features without shivering anyway, and he knew this. He could sense it. As soon as one of them turned away from him, shaking, he knew what the reason was. He couldn't change himself to please them, so he tried to make himself invisible. The day passed slowly for Sandra. She constantly watched the clock on the wall of her homeroom. At 10 minutes to 3, she gathered her books together. She didn't want anything to slow her down. At 2 minutes to 3, she got up and moved to an empty desk near the door. When the bell rang, she was the first one out of the homeroom. She raced toward the front door. She had just about reached it when she saw Chink coming from the opposite direction. She stopped and waited for him. Chink was in such a hurry that he didn't notice her and the bunch of children rushing for the door. He went out the door and then stopped and stood around, not knowing what to do. He felt like everyone was watching him. He would have bolted and run, but his curiosity and his humble respect for Sandra wouldn't allow him to take such a cowardly way out. He saw her as soon as she came out the door and glanced the other way. "Hey, big man," she said lightly as she came up. "What you trying to do, ignore me?" She was only joking with him, but her words started him to shifting from one foot to the other. Chink glanced at her, then looked away. He couldn't stand to look her in the eyes. "What's wrong, boy?" she said, still joking with him. "'Cause you got on them sharp-ass threads, you think you big shit, huh?" Now she had him. Chink dressed above average. His clothes cost more than any of the other kids could afford. He dressed sharp every day, but he didn't want to be reminded of it. Her direct attack embarrassed him, and he blushed down to his shoes. His constant movement gave Sandra a feeling of being a complete woman. She knew he was embarrassed by being near her. It was a new experience for her, the total power of a woman over a man. She enjoyed the feeling. When some friends passed and yelled out at them, she enjoyed his embarrassment. She took his arm and wrapped hers around it. "You gonna walk me to work," she stated. She felt his muscular arm tighten up under her fingers, but he followed her on down the street. He kept his head down and shuffled along beside her. When one of the addicts came up and spoke to him, he didn't know how to handle it with Sandra beside him. She handled it for him. "Go on, man, and take care of your business. I'll be waiting right here." She stopped and leaned against a rotting fence. Chink walked off a few feet, removed a small balloon, and gave it to the young drug addict. Sandra watched as money was exchanged between them. When Chink returned, she gave him a big smile, revealing beautiful, white, evenly spaced teeth. "Don't worry, man. That's what I wanted to talk to you about," she said lightly. Chink stopped in his tracks. He wasn't going to start her off on drugs no matter how much she begged. He really liked and respected Sandra. He remembered when she used to come to school as raggedy as he was, and he knew that her mother hadn't bought the nice clothes she wore. He respected her for being able to go out into the streets and get what she wanted, but he wasn't about to make a drug addict out of her. "If it's drugs you want, gal, I ain't about to sell you none," he stated point blank. For the first time, he glanced up and looked her directly in the eyes. "I mean it, Sandra." "Well, I'll be damned," Sandra replied, surprised. "But it ain't no drugs that I want to buy. I want you to sell some drugs for me," she stated as she took his arm and started him on down the street. Now it was Chink's turn to be surprised. He stared at her with his mouth open, unable to speak. "Boy, if you don't close your mouth," she said lightly, "you gonna end up catching you a mouthful of flies." She laughed, then removed the balloon from her bra and gave it to him. "I don't know how many times you can cut it. All I know is it can be cut, Chink. I done already had an addict tested, and he almost fell out 'cause it was too strong." They walked along in silence with Chink carrying the dope. He finally asked, "Where did the dope come from?" By the time they reached the store where Sandra worked, she had explained everything to Chink, even to how much dope she had hidden. For some reason, she believed she could be honest with him. She took him on as a partner. They shook hands outside the store. Then Chink went on his way to find out just how much cut the dope could stand. The next morning before going to school, Sandra dressed carefully in an expensive pants outfit she had stolen over the weekend. It was a form-fitting outfit, black, with a white blouse and black silk jacket. The price tag had been $120. When she had inquired about it, the salesgirl had almost laughed in her face knowing that the skinny black girl in front of her couldn't afford the expensive outfit. She had made a big joke out of it, displaying it as if she knew she had a sale until Sandra had made up her mind to steal the outfit, just to teach the girl a lesson. Sandra knew she couldn't go back into the store again since the girl had more than likely missed the outfit as soon as Sandra had left. Sandra glanced in her cracked mirror at herself, and she liked what she saw. She quickly gathered up her books and left the apartment, not knowing if her mother had come in or not. As soon as she came out of the apartment building, she found Chink waiting on her. "Hi, honey," she said sweetly, causing him to drop his head and blush. She examined him while his head was down. He was wearing a pair of gray pants with a matching leather jacket. The clothes, being expensive, covered his muscular body to perfection. He took her books from her. "That stuff was sure enough smoking, Sandra. It knocked them junkies to their knees," he said, and held out a roll of money. She slowly counted the roll of money. "It's over $200 here," she said, surprised. "You ain't took your share out yet, have you?" "Oh, no, Sandra. I can wait till next time before I takes out mine," he said, speaking flatly with his head down. Sandra counted the money again, then split it in half. "Here. I told you yesterday that we was gonna cut the money in half," she said, as she pushed his share into his hand. Then, as he took the money, she reached over and lifted up his chin. "Listen, Chink, when you talk to me, don't give me that shuffling shit you use in school. And quit speaking like you just come from Georgia or Mississippi, boy. You ain't country, so stop acting like it. Be a man. I don't like boys," she stated coldly. As they continued on toward school, he lifted his head up and took pride in the fact that he was walking next to the best-dressed girl in school. He noticed the large, mannish-looking hat she wore. It made her look like a boy, but the black outfit she wore was all female. Every line of her slim body was shown to its best advantage, and he gloried in the fact that he was walking beside this young, fine, brown frame. When they passed other kids and the kids yelled out at them, he found himself walking in a more caddish manner. Sandra noticed the change in him, but remained silent. For some reason, she found herself drawn to the husky boy next to her. There was nothing handsome about him, but he wasn't as ugly as the silly girls in school liked to pretend he was. His long arms were loaded with muscle, and when she looked in his eyes, she found them to be bright and alert, with a smoldering intelligence that he couldn't hide. From that day on, they walked to school and came home together. Some days, she'd lead him over to the library. At first, he had rebelled, until she picked out certain books and made him promise her that he'd take them home and read them. And once she started him reading, he was addicted. He sometimes took her arm and led her over to the library, where he'd wait patiently until she picked out some books for him. The summer passed swiftly for them until all of her dope was gone, and in its place, she had a bank account that was over $3,000. She made Chink start an account, and together they put up some money, and Chink bought some dope and continued to sell it for the both of them. One evening after she got paid, she left the store. As soon as she started to walk up the street, she noticed a car pull up beside her. "Hey, baby, how about a ride?" She glanced over and saw Eddie. "No, honey, that's all right. I'm expecting somebody to pick me up," she said, speaking the truth. Chink had just bought an old car, and she had been looking for him out the window of the store. She figured he must have got held up and decided to walk on home. "Come on, honey," Eddie said, his voice shaking slightly. For the first time, she really took notice of him. His nose was running and his eyes were watery. She knew at once that he was sick, but it didn't bring any pity out of her. Over the months, she had counted up how much money she had given to him, and it was over $100. so she had decided that that must come to a stop. He was nothing to her, so it wasn't her problem trying to help him keep up his habit. He parked the car and came around the front of it. "Here, girl, what's with this funny shit? You act like I done did something to you," he exclaimed loudly. "It ain't that, Eddie. It's just that I ain't got no money to give you. And I know that's all you want. You don't never stop by until Friday when I get paid, so I don't need you, man," she stated coldly, looking him in the eye. For a minute he was surprised. Then anger took over. He had depended on her to get his fix money, and now the silly young bitch was coming down on him. He grabbed at her, only to find a switchblade knife descending on his arm, and he just barely snatched his arm back in time. Now he was really mad. "Fool-ass young bitch," he snarled angrily. "You damn near cut me," he said. "If you put your hands on me, I am going to cut you," she answered him honestly. Before the words were out of her mouth, his hand flashed out and he slapped her viciously across the face. His hand was a blur as he slapped her again. Then when she attempted to bring up the knife, he knocked it from her hand. He stepped in close and slapped her viciously until her head rocked on her shoulders. She tried to scratch him, but he was too swift for her. Tears of anger flowed down her cheeks as she tried to fight him back. When he demanded the money, she cursed him harshly. He slapped her again. Suddenly, he was gone, and she fought back the tears so that she could see. Chink had him by the back of his neck, then spun him around and smashed a huge fist into Eddie's face, again and again. The fight was as lopsided as her effort had been against Eddie. Eddie didn't stand a chance. Sandra had never seen Chink angry, and now she hoped she never would again. He moved with the swiftness of a hunting cat. His strength was that of a bull, and his anger was that of a man that has found himself loving something, and then seeing someone trying to destroy it. Chink couldn't have explained to himself the rage that overcame him when he drove up and saw Eddie slapping Sandra around. This slim girl was the only thing he cared for in the whole fucking world, and he had known in that minute he'd die before he'd allow anyone to harm her. He had burst from his car like a mad bull, goaded beyond any thought but to kill that which offended him. As Eddie slumped to his feet, Sandra grabbed one of Chink's arms and tried to drag him away from the bloody bundle that lay at his feet. But Chink's arm was like a band of steel. Her small strength was nothing, and he didn't even feel her pulling on him. It took 4 men who had come up to watch the fight to get him off of Eddie, and they had a job of holding the young boy back from killing the older one on the ground. "Chink! Chink!" she screamed, and threw herself into his arms, fixing her small body against his so that he couldn't help but notice who it was. Sandra was as tall as Chink, but that was where the comparison ended. For a brief minute he almost tossed her away from him, but she clung to him. Her arms were locked around his muscular neck, and as he rocked his wide body back and forth, she was swung almost off her feet. But she held tightly. He was like an enraged grizzly bear, but somehow she managed to get him back to his car. "We gotta leave, baby," she said over and over again. "The police will be here in a minute, and we don't need that." She pushed him into the car and ran around and jumped in the other side and started the motor. He had been giving her driving lessons in the evenings, so she could handle a car quite well. Sandra drove over to her house and took him upstairs with her. She led him into her bedroom as if he was a child, and as they sat down on the edge of the bed, his huge frame shook from the passion that he had just been filled with. Sandra leaned over and kissed him tenderly. His arms encircled her until she believed she was held in a vice. He kissed her slowly, tenderly at first. Then she returned his kisses until they found themselves making love. It was the first time for her, and she cried out, but he was so tender that she stretched to meet his every move until they were as one. They made love the rest of the evening and through the early morning until Sandra heard her mother come in, drunk. She didn't bother to get up, and neither did he. She lay in his arms until the sharp light from her door opening caused them both to roll out of the bed. "Whore? No good, bitch!" her mother screamed at her drunkenly from the doorway. She yelled for her boyfriend to come in. "Kick that punk out of here," she ordered as her companion came into the bedroom behind her. By this time, Sandra had quickly dressed. "He ain't throwing nobody out," Sandra stated quietly. "I paid the fucking rent on this place for the past 3 months now, so ain't nobody that I like gonna get tossed out." "Bitch, you ain't but 15 years old. You don't order nobody around in here. I says who's gonna come in and who's not," her mother replied. She stepped forward to slap Sandra, but found herself staring at the switchblade knife her daughter held. "Ain't gonna be no slaps either," Sandra stated harshly, "'cause if you put your drunken hands on me, I'll cut your goddamn throat." Her mother stared at her, speechless. She didn't know what to say, but she wasn't drunk enough to run up against the knife her daughter held. "I'm gonna call the police and have this nigga here put in jail for rape," she finally managed to say. "I'll fix his little red wagon first, then I'll have your ass put in juvenile until you get some sense." "And if you do," Sandra stated coldly, "there won't be nobody to pay your rent for you." Her words stopped her mother in her tracks. She had become too accustomed to having her daughter pay the rent. Chink removed a large bankroll from his pocket and tossed $80 on the bed. "There's this month's or next month's rent. I'll stop by and pay your rent each month. But Sandra is moving out of this flat. If you want the money, it's yours. If you want to go to the police, it's up to you. But you won't get a penny if you do." Greed flashed across the mother's face. Her eyes went to the money on the bed, then back to the young couple. "Well now," she said, changing her tone, "Sandra's old enough to do what she wants, but these white folks don't think so. If you get into any trouble, I'm just gonna say I don't know nothing about it, that's all. Don't come begging me to stick my neck out if something happens. And I expect you to bring me that rent money on the 1st of every month, 'cause I needs it." She picked up the money, then added, "This is just enough for me to catch up on my back rent, so I'll be expecting some more on the 1st. She glanced at her daughter, then dropped her eyes, because both of them knew it was a lie. Sandra didn't have any suitcases, so she put her clothes in brown shopping bags. Chink helped her carry everything to the car. He was so happy he couldn't believe it was really happening. Sandra was just as surprised. It had all happened so sudden. At 3 o'clock in the morning, she found herself moving out on her own. But for some reason, with Chink beside her, she wasn't frightened of the move. It seemed as if it was all to the better. They checked into a motel for the rest of the morning. And the next day, Chink went out and found a dope fiend couple who rented an apartment for them. Chink paid 3 months in advance on a modern apartment on the west side of Los Angeles. Since they had the car, they didn't have any problem getting back and forth to school. Since he was 16, Chink wanted to quit school. But Sandra raised so much hell about it he decided to stay on, and their days in high school passed quickly. As time wore on, each became more dependent on the other. For Chink, Sandra was his world. Everything he did was for her. And she felt the same way. She went out of her way to cook good dinners for him. Once she found out what he liked, she'd spend hours in the kitchen getting it right for him. He had stopped her from stealing from the stores, and now he bought all her clothes. He still sold dope every day, and his income was fairly large for a young couple. He bought a later model car, which was the beginning of the end. It drew attention to the young couple when they went to school. Now the teachers even whispered about them as they passed in the hallways together. They were too well dressed, and when they went to the lunchroom, they bought whatever they wanted without concerning themselves about the cost. The other kids talked, and soon everybody in the school knew that they lived together. Spring had just begun. They had passed the winter together with no problems, and now that Sandra was 16, they didn't think they had anything to worry about. Chink stopped Sandra on the way to the lunchroom. "I gotta run home for a minute, baby, and pick up some more stuff. You want to ride with me or go ahead and eat?" he asked her during their lunch break. "No, honey, I'm starving. I think I'll go ahead and eat. I'll see you when you get back," she answered quietly, then smiled at him. She couldn't have realized that it would be quite a while before they would meet again. Chink had only a half hour, so he left in a hurry. On the way back from the apartment, he had a flat tire, so he left the car and caught a cab. As soon as the cab pulled up and he got out, Detective seemed to come out of the ground. He tried to swallow the dope, but he had too many balloons on him. The school kids sitting by the window saw it all. Chink went down under a flood of white and black detectives as they tried to reach him before he could swallow the stuff. He fought back, striking out with his huge arms. He broke a white detective's nose and blood gushed out as he screamed in pain. Another officer took his place and went down just as quickly. "Pin his arms!" someone yelled, as the men scrambled around trying to hold tight to the struggling boy. One detective pulled his gun. "Step away from the black bastard!" he roared loudly, pointing his gun at the struggling group. By this time, the fighting group of men was surrounded by kids that had run out of classrooms to see the fight. "Don't shoot him, you no-good bastards!" one of the braver kids yelled. "You got 10 men! Ain't that enough to take one little black boy?" And indeed it was enough. Now the detectives put their billy clubs to work, and Chink went down to stay, with his head bloody. The men rolled him over on his back and handcuffed him roughly. "That's one black bastard that's a bull," one of the white detectives said, giving a compliment but still stepping on the toes of the black officers who were beside him. "What about the girl?" one of the detectives asked. "She's probably still in school," a black officer answered. "We can walk in and pick her up now," he said, and started off, followed by 3 white detectives. When the school bell rang, Sandra left her class, not aware of what had happened outside the school. When she passed 2 white men in the long hallway, she took them to be school teachers. If she had bothered to glance behind her, she would have seen the men turn and start to follow her. She stopped at her locker and put her books up. Before she could close it, a black hand reached over and held it open. "What's the idea, man?" she asked, without bothering to glance up to see who it was. "We want to see what you have in your locker," the man answered. This time she did glance up. Her senses reeled and spelled out police as she noticed the well-dressed black man leaning over her shoulder. Her glance quickly took in the white man next to him, then she turned and saw the other one. "Damn, man," she exclaimed, fighting for time. She didn't have anything in her locker, but she hesitated anyway, trying to figure out what was happening. Her slight hesitation made the officers think she had something to hide. One of them shoved her roughly out of the way. She struck her back on the handle and cursed loudly. "You white bastard!" she swore. They tossed everything out of her locker and went through it until they knew there was nothing in there to conceal. "Well, what now?" one of them asked. "Well, we know she's in it up to her neck with him, so take her down too," another one ordered. And as they led her out of the school, the teacher stood around helplessly and watched. Not one asked what the problem was. The rough handling of the girl meant nothing to them as long as they weren't involved. The black teachers who watched shook in their shoes because they knew what the white police thought of all of them. They could and would be handled the same way if they so much as opened their mouths. As the police passed, they each gave them a wide smile, as if they had just arrested some notorious criminal instead of a 16-year-old girl. They led Sandra out to the police car, and when she saw Chink in the back seat, handcuffed and bleeding, her heart turned to stone. One of the officers spoke to her. "Isn't this your boyfriend?" he asked harshly, trying to make his voice as cold as possible so that he would frighten her. But instead of frightening her, it only made her grit her teeth in anger. The sight of Chink had been enough. Now the detective's voice on top of it filled her with unreasoning anger. If his voice had been harsh, hers was chilling when she deigned to answer. "If you mean, honky, do I give him some pussy every now and then? That's our business. Ain't got nothing to do with no peckerwood." The young white detective was shocked, and his face showed it. One of the other white officers stepped up, thinking that he had to protect their image in front of the school kids who stood around. He couldn't allow no black kid to talk to them in that manner in front of such a large group of people. One of the black detectives had to fight back a smile. He had known it was coming. He could tell from the shock in her eyes when she saw her boyfriend in the car. He realized she was angry and would say just about whatever came into her mind, and damn the consequences. "You're a smart black bitch, ain't you?" the older officer said as he stepped up and slapped her. The only mistake he made was slapping her instead of using his fist, because the slap didn't even turn her head. She brought her knee up so fast he didn't even realize it was coming until pain exploded in his nuts and he folded up like a used bag, crying out in pain. Now all the hours Chink had spent teaching her how to protect herself came into use. She moved coldly, as if she was standing outside herself. She didn't think she could win, but she could hurt this one white bastard in front of her. She moved so fast she took the officers by surprise. Knocking his hat from his head, she grabbed a handful of hair and pulled his head toward her knee. She caught him in the middle of the face with a brutal, powerful blow that splattered blood over both of them. His head shot back as if his neck had broken, and before they could reach her, she kicked him in the face again, breaking his nose. They moved on her then, coming from all sides. Chink, watching from the back seat of the police car, cried out in his helplessness. To the white officers who rushed at her, she was not a young black girl anymore, a schoolgirl at that. She was just someone black who had found the nerve to strike back at them. They couldn't tolerate it, and they rushed her with billy clubs, striking each other in their hurry to strike her. She went under them, holding her head for protection, until one well-placed blow put her to sleep. Then she didn't feel the other blows that rained down on her prone body. Chink, in his blind rage with his hands cuffed behind his back, tried to butt his way out of the car, until one of the uniformed cops in the car caught him behind the ear with his club. As Chink sank down on the floor of the car, the cop spoke to his partner. "I know how the poor bastard must feel. If it was my old lady out there, I'd want to kill the whole fucking bunch of them." "Okay! Okay, she's out!" one of the black detectives yelled, and pushed white detectives out of the way. The murmurings from the crowd of school kids brought them back to their senses, and to avoid a riot, they controlled themselves. As the detectives tossed her unconscious body into the car beside Chink, one of the white detectives muttered, "They ain't no better than a couple of damn animals, the way they act." "No better," one of his friends commented. "That's all the fuck they are, is animals." The black officer who had been responsible for the arrest glanced at the two white officers who were speaking. He noticed the $39 washable suits both men wore, then glanced into the car at Chink, who wore $50 pants and a pair of alligator shoes that must have cost $100. For the first time, he was ashamed that he was responsible for the arrest of the young couple. He knew just about everything there was to know about them. He wondered idly if the white cops who called them animals could have come from such hardships as children and survived as well as this young couple had. No, he doubted seriously if either one would have been able to pull himself up out of the ghetto as they had been trying to do.